I'm Nathan, 47, a small business owner in Cedar Rapids. At dinner, my dad raised his glass and said, "We've saved for Caleb's tuition since he was born." Then he handed me the bill. That night, I realized my ambition wasn't overlooked. It was intentionally left unfunded. 4 years later, standing on a stage under hot lights and the scent of floor polish, I finally said out loud what they never expected to hear. If you've ever felt quietly erased, tell me, where are you listening from tonight? It started with a box I should have thrown out years ago. One of those sagging cardboard things labeled college stuff in black Sharpie, tucked in the back of my closet like a fossil. I was looking for an old HDMI cable, but instead I found it. A beige envelope, its corners softened by time, the glue strip long unsealed. I held it like a relic. Westbridge University. My name typed clean across the center. Same envelope Caleb had torn open in the kitchen, whooped, and sprinted around the house like he'd just won the lottery. There had been hugs, selfies, a toast with cider and champagne glasses. My envelope? I'd opened it at the same table, same night. But no one remembers that. Cedar Rapids was thick with early summer. That night years ago, the smell of roast chicken still hung in the air. The house was clean, too clean, like we were expecting guests. I sat at the table with my hands resting on the envelope, hesitant. Caleb was late, as usual, probably making an entrance. "I got in," I said, trying to sound casual, like I hadn't read and reread the letter 3 times upstairs already. Dad looked up briefly from his phone. "Westbridge?" "Yeah, full business track." I smiled. "I'm in." "That's good," he said. Then, "Caleb's still waiting to hear, right?" "Today too," I said. A minute later, the front door flew open. "I got in!" Caleb shouted, waving a nearly identical envelope. "Poli-sci Westbridge!" Mom screamed. Dad stood up. Chairs scraped. There was hugging, clapping. Someone popped open a bottle of non-alcoholic champagne that had been chilling for who knows how long. Caleb got his own moment. My moment got absorbed, like rain into already wet ground. Later that night, we sat down to dinner. Roast chicken, green beans, cornbread, the usual spread when Mom felt celebratory. "We need to talk about college plans," Dad said, folding his napkin into a triangle. He was calm, but he looked straight at Caleb. "We've saved for your tuition since you were born. You won't have to worry about expenses. Just focus on your studies." Caleb nodded, grinning like he expected this all along. I waited. Surely they hadn't forgotten. Surely I was next. I cleared my throat. "What about me?" There was a beat of silence, the kind that doesn't fill a room. It hollows it out. Mom reached across the table and patted my hand. "You've always been the independent one, Nathan." Dad didn't even pause. "You'll figure it out, you always do." They moved on, talked about dorms, meal plans, laptops. I chewed my food slowly, like swallowing too fast might make it all real. After dessert, Dad handed me the dinner check. "You've got your summer job still, right?" I nodded, smiled, said thanks. The next morning I picked up extra shifts at Bean Cycle Cafe. No announcement, no drama, just a quiet decision. If no one's going to invest in me, I'll invest in myself. That night I sat on my bed, the acceptance letter back in my hands. Same words Caleb had, same school. But somehow the paper felt heavier, like it was printed in invisible ink I was supposed to believe without reading. Maybe letters lie. Maybe worth isn't something you can fold into thirds and slip in an envelope. I slid the letter back into its sleeve and tucked it into the top drawer of my desk. Not as proof I got in, but as proof that no one toasted to it. My phone buzzed. "Zeke. Room's still open in the apartment if you're in. Warning, no AC. One functional burner, maybe a mouse. I stared at the message, thumb hovering over the keyboard. I didn't answer. Not yet. But I started packing. I was the first one at the party, and the last one anyone noticed. The backyard was dressed like a postcard version of celebration. Balloon arch straining against the wind, paper lanterns swinging from clotheslines, plastic tablecloths weighed down by lemonade pitchers, and too many deviled eggs. At the center of it all, a banner read in bold blue letters, "Go Caleb, future leader." I stood by the punch bowl in the only blazer I owned, sleeves a little tight around the shoulders now. I wasn't on the guest list. I was on the chore chart. Mom's co-workers crowded around the dessert table. Dad's friends from church were laughing about something in the corner. Relatives I hadn't seen since middle school slapped Caleb on the back like he'd just been elected to Congress. No one mentioned my name. Uncle Ross spotted me balancing a tray of cups and called out, "So Nathan, what are your plans?" I opened my mouth. Before I could get a word out, Mom swooped in with a smile so fast it almost looked rehearsed. "He's still figuring things out," she said lightly. "Nathan's always had his own path." I nodded. Said nothing. Set down the tray and moved back behind the table. That phrase, "his own path," was one they reserved for people who wandered, not led. It was the nice version of saying I didn't fit the mold. Caleb had a path. Mine was more like an unpaved service road that no one wanted to fund. Someone turned up the music. A cousin started a game of cornhole. I handed out cupcakes, cleaned up spilled punch, and kept my eyes down. Caleb eventually made his entrance. Fresh haircut, tailored shirt, too much cologne. He worked the crowd like a pro, flashing the smile that made teachers forgive late homework, and adults call him sharp. I watched him circle the yard, soaking in admiration like a sponge. Then came the toast. Someone clinked a glass. Caleb stood on the makeshift patio stage, holding a plastic flute filled with cider. "To my future in politics," he said, beaming, "and to the parents who believed in me. Mom, Dad, thank you for everything." Applause. Cheers. A few people shouted, "Here, here!" I watched from behind the drink station, holding a cup I'd poured for myself. Half full, lukewarm, forgotten. That was the moment. The real one. Not dramatic, not cruel, just precise. Like being erased with a clean swipe of whiteout. I wasn't invisible, I'd just been removed, edited out of the family script, sentence by sentence. And the worst part? No one missed what was gone. Later that night, after the last balloon deflated and the folding chairs were stacked, I stood alone in the kitchen, staring at a note card on the counter. "Caleb, laptop set up tomorrow. Don't forget your new suit." There was no card for me. No reminder, no checklist, no mention that I too was leaving soon, that I too had a college dorm room, well, an apartment, waiting. I went to my room, shut the door, and sat at the edge of my bed. I pulled up Zeke's text again. "Room's still open in the apartment if you're in. Warning, no AC, one functional burner, maybe a mouse." I replied, "I'm in." It wasn't about the rent. It wasn't even about the mouse. It was about finding space where I wasn't a ghost at someone else's party. That night, I took the plastic cup I'd been holding during the toast and carried it to my desk. On the bottom, someone had written in black marker, "Bishop Family 2020. I grabbed a Sharpie, sat down, and slowly blacked out the word family. What remained was a name. And sometimes, that's all you need to start again. The house was louder than usual that morning. Dad's voice boomed from the garage. He was loading Caleb's things into the back of the family SUV like he was moving a senator into office. Mom fluttered in and out of rooms with a camera and a checklist. Caleb was already in his Westbridge hoodie, even though the semester hadn't started yet. "Where's your duffel bag?" Dad called. "In the kitchen," Caleb replied, grinning. "Don't forget the speakers." I stood at the top of the stairs with 2 thrifted suitcases in hand. No one looked up. No one asked if I needed help. By the time they drove off, the driveway was full of tire marks and empty soda cups. My own departure wasn't scheduled. I just waited until the chaos thinned out, then loaded my things into the 10-year-old Civic, check engine light glowing like a warning about my future. They hadn't offered to ride with me. Mom did appear briefly at the door as I was pulling out. She waved, then jogged to the curb and handed me a cardboard box. "These are your old twin sheets," she said. "Still good," I nodded. "Thanks." "And make sure you check the oil," Dad added, suddenly behind her. "These old cars can turn on you." That was it. No drive safe, no call us when you get there, just oil and fabric. 2 hours later, I pulled up to my new home, a 4-story apartment building that looked like it had given up halfway through construction. The paint peeled in strips. The hallway light flickered like it was haunted. There was a faint smell of burnt toast and something else. Maybe hope on life support. I lugged my bags up 3 flights of stairs. By the second, I was sweating. By the third, I was thinking maybe the mouse Zeke had warned me about would help carry the boxes. Then the door creaked open. Zeke stood there in pajama pants, holding a mug that said, "Don't ask me before coffee." "Welcome to the jungle," he said, stepping aside. "Rules are simple. Label your leftovers, don't touch my hot sauce, and try not to die in the shower. Water pressure is personal." Inside, the living room had 2 second-hand couches and a rug that didn't match anything. My room had a mattress on the floor, a desk missing a drawer, and a window that stuck halfway. There was no closet, just a metal rack leaning against the wall. Still, it was mine. I dropped my bags, sat on the edge of the mattress, and took it all in. Above me, the neighbor's TV blared a cooking show. On the street, a siren wailed, then faded. I had 3 shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, a half-used notebook, and a coffee-stained planner. That was my college life. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt unburdened. Lonely, yes, but not discarded. This loneliness was mine, not something handed to me like a set of twin sheets, not something I'd earned by disappointing someone, just mine. And weirdly, that made it easier to carry. I unpacked slowly. Every drawer I filled felt like staking a flag. I taped my acceptance letter to the wall above my desk. But this time I crossed out Westbridge University and wrote underneath it. Made it, not because of them. Then I opened my laptop and started building a schedule. 5 Ondo M. Bean Cycle Cafe. 9 Tumanori AM. Intro to Econ 12:30 p.m. History of American Business 2 p.m. Study block 6 p.m. Bookstore shift 9 p.m. Reading 11 p.m. Sleep optional. It looked like a military operation, and maybe it was. I was going to war with the version of me they never believed in. A shout broke the silence. "Microwave's free if you want pasta," Zeke called from the kitchen. "It's kind of edible," I laughed, surprised by the sound. It had been a long time since I'd heard my own laugh and believed it. "Coming," I said, stepping over the threshold of my new life. Steam hissed, hammers clanked, and my eyelids weighed at least a pound each. I pulled the espresso handle down, angling the portafilter like I'd been taught, though muscle memory had started to replace actual thought. It was 5:34 a.m. at Bean Cycle Cafe, and I hadn't slept in 36 hours. My first customer, some business major in a Westbridge sweatshirt, tapped his fingers against the counter while scrolling through emails. "You're too chipper for this hour," he muttered without looking up. "Sleep is for legacy students," I replied, sliding the latte across. He smirked. "Barely. But it counted." Beancycle smelled like roasted beans, cinnamon scones, and desperation. The shop sat just off campus, wedged between a bike repair shop and a tax prep office, and served as neutral ground for early rising professors and bleary-eyed students trying to pass Econ 101. I worked mornings there and weekends at a campus bookstore where I restocked textbooks that cost more than my monthly food budget. Between the two, I earned just enough to cover rent, instant noodles, and whatever part of my tuition wasn't eaten by federal loans. While other students had bank accounts and backup plans, I had a spreadsheet and a coffee grinder. My shift ended at 9 a.m. I peeled off my apron, clocked out, and took a seat near the window with my laptop. A cold drip beside me, Google Docs open, I started editing a presentation for a class I hadn't even attended yet. 2 tabs away, a freelance job board blinked with refresh notifications. Half an hour later, my phone buzzed. Zeke. "You realize," he said without saying hello, "you're managing more clients than my cousin's actual agency?" I snorted. "That's generous. I'm managing to stay awake." "Seriously," he continued, "digital flyers, logo tweaks, cafe punch cards. What do you call all this?" "Survival." He paused. "You ever thought of packaging it up?" "I've thought about sleep," I said. "That feels ambitious enough." We hung up. But the question sat there, packaging it up. For months, I'd been helping local spots with things like online menus, newsletter drafts, and Instagram bios. It wasn't organized. It wasn't branded. It wasn't anything, really. Just me fixing small problems for small payments, in between classes and caffeine. That afternoon, I worked the register during the post-lunch lull. A regular came in. Middle-aged, short gray hair, always ordered a cappuccino with 2 raw sugars and no foam. "I've seen your flyers," she said casually. "You made those for that sandwich shop, right?" I blinked. "Yeah, I did." "They looked good. Clean. You've got the tone. Want a shot at doing my cafe social?" I froze for half a second. Not from nerves, just from surprise. That was the first time anyone had called what I did a skill, not a hustle. I nodded. "Sure, I'd like that." She slid me a card. "Call me tonight. We'll talk numbers." Back at the apartment, I didn't nap. I didn't change. I opened my laptop, stared at the blinking cursor on a blank web page editor, and started building. Her menu, her story, her photos. I stitched them into a site that crashed twice, lost its formatting once, and nearly made me throw my laptop out the window. At 4:52 a.m., it loaded. Clean, responsive, real. I sat back, exhausted, and watched the cursor blink on the published homepage. The next morning, I handed her the link over a mug of her own cappuccino. She tapped through the pages, nodding, then pulled out a small white envelope. "300 in cash," she said. "Just the start. I told 2 friends about you." I swallowed the lump in my throat, took the envelope with both hands like it was made of glass. Later that evening, I opened Google Drive and renamed a folder. From Side Hustles to Mid-State Digital. Just a folder for now. But maybe, finally, something more. The music from our backyard filtered through the kitchen window. Top 40 hits just loud enough to cover awkward conversations. I stood over the punch bowl, ladling pink citrus fizz into clear plastic cups. One hand sticky, the other balancing a tray. I wasn't invited. I was assigned. The party was for Caleb. Again. This time it was to celebrate his induction into the Student Leadership Council, a position he'd gotten after a single semester of showing up and saying the right things. Mom said it was just a little gathering, but she rented a tent, strung fairy lights from the gutters, and borrowed folding chairs from the church. It looked more like a backyard wedding than a school celebration. I was wearing khakis and a name tag someone had left behind from the last church fundraiser. It still said Daniel in faded ink. No one noticed. Guests milled about, wine glasses in hand, complimenting the hors d'oeuvres and talking about how natural Caleb was in leadership. My job was to refill the lemonade, keep the cheese tray stocked, and not get in the way. "You must be so proud of your brother," a neighbor said, handing me her empty glass. I smiled. "He's always had a way with people." She nodded and drifted off. No follow-up. "No, and what about you?" Later, I bumped into Uncle Ross by the snack table. "So, Nathan," he said, squinting, "what are you up to these days?" Before I could answer, Mom appeared. "He's got some digital thing going on," she said with a quick laugh. "But Caleb's really the political one." "Oh, sure, Uncle Ross said. "Natural born." I excused myself and went back to the kitchen, where the only questions were about napkins and whether we had more ice. I carried a tray outside, weaving between lawn chairs. The sky was lavender now, the lights overhead glowing soft yellow. Caleb stood near the tent, shaking hands like a congressman. Then someone clinked a glass. Caleb climbed a few steps onto the deck and raised his sparkling cider. "I just want to say thank you," he began. "To everyone here, and especially to Mom and Dad, for believing in me every step of the way. I wouldn't be here without your support." A chorus of applause. Some people cheered. I stood near the hydrangeas, holding a tray of refills, my own cup half full and forgotten. The moment was sharp but quiet, like watching yourself get cropped out of a family photo. I wasn't angry, just aware of how cleanly they'd written me out of the narrative. Not a villain, not a victim, just an omission. After the party, I stayed behind to help stack the chairs and throw away the solo cups. Caleb was inside, showing someone his speech draft. Dad was wiping down the grill. Mom disappeared upstairs to change out of her hosting dress. I was out back alone when my phone buzzed. "Zeke. Taco Tuesday's on me. You look like you survived a baptism by beige." I smiled at the screen. Inside, the dishwasher hummed. I tossed the last stack of plates into the sink and washed my hands. There was a leftover cupcake on the counter. I took it with me. Back at the apartment, I kicked off my shoes, sat down at my desk, and checked my email. One unread. Bakery client. "Let's talk pricing. We're ready to start." I leaned back in my chair, the overhead light flickering just a little. I pulled a sticky note from the drawer and scribbled something in bold, uneven letters. "If no one celebrates you, build the confetti yourself." I stuck it to the side of my monitor, right next to the renamed folder, Mid-State Digital. My kitchen table became a command center. While Caleb sent selfies from Madrid, posing near statues, tapas in hand, hashtags dripping with global purpose. I was hunched over my aging laptop, debugging a broken menu bar for a sandwich shop called The Breadboard. The microwave dinged behind me. Another dollar store dinner. Zeke shuffled past, humming off-key to old jazz streaming from his laptop, the kind that made even instant mashed potatoes sound romantic. The room was dim, except for the glow of 2 screens and the blinking router light in the corner. Coffee had gone cold 2 hours ago, but I still drank it. At some point, you stop doing it for the caffeine and start doing it because holding something warm feels like control. I wasn't just surviving anymore. Something electric lived in those nights, between invoices, failed plugins, and the dopamine rush of a page finally loading the way it was supposed to. "You're not just scraping by, man," Zeke said one night, watching me drag images into a new layout. "You're scaling." I snorted. "Funny, I always thought you needed capital to be a business." He shrugged. Sometimes all you need is rejection and Wi-Fi. He wasn't wrong. I'd been quietly building things since high school. Flyers for classmates, blog headers, an Instagram template for a local dog groomer. I never called it anything. It was just what I did in between everything else. But now, with the bakery client pushing forward, I had to get serious. They signed on officially Tuesday morning. I opened my email half asleep and saw the transfer notification. $450 wired to my account. I didn't shout, I didn't dance, I didn't text anyone, I just stared at the number. They paid him tuition, I sent invoices. That was the difference. But for once, the numbers weren't stacked against me. They were building something under my name. I opened a blank slide deck. For the first time, I wasn't making a presentation for class. I was building my pitch deck, service tiers, logo concepts, sample metrics, testimonials. Midstate Digital wasn't just a folder anymore. It was an idea with shape, with traction. I started sketching out subscription packages, bundled services for small towns like mine that were often ignored by slick firms with downtown views. No fancy language. Just need a menu? A calendar? A we exist on the internet? We've got you. By Thursday, I had 3 concepts drafted and a pricing table rough enough to make an economist cry. And then it happened. An email, subject line, referral from breadboard. Interested? Can we meet Monday? I reread it 3 times. It wasn't the money. It was the momentum. A breadcrumb that said maybe, just maybe, I wasn't building in the dark. That night, I stayed up too late again. But not because I had to, because I wanted to. I created a new desktop folder. Mid-State Beta Clients. Inside, I saved the bakery's invoice, the new referrals intake form, and a single note to self. Start where no one expects you to finish. I was halfway through resizing a bakery's homepage banner when the knock came. 3 quick raps, too loud for a neighbor, and too hesitant for Zeke. I opened the door and saw Caleb standing there like someone who had finally lost the map he always assumed would be handed to him. His hair was a mess, shirt half tucked, laptop hugged tight to his chest like a life raft. "Hey," he said, voice thin. "Didn't know you remembered where I lived," I replied, stepping aside. He didn't argue. Just walked in and stood awkwardly in the middle of the room, scanning the mismatched furniture like it was his first time seeing the world without throw pillows and coordinated coasters. "I'm failing," he blurted finally. "Okay," I said slowly. "At what?" "My thesis. Urban governance. Professor said my methodology is garbage, my data's thin, and my structure's narratively confused." His words. I waited. He fidgeted. "I've got 3 weeks to rewrite it," he added, opening his laptop. "And I don't know where to start." He sat down at the table without waiting for permission. The glow from the screen lit up his face, and for the first time, I saw something raw in his expression. Not confidence, not charm, something closer to fear. "You've always been better at analysis," he said. "I never learned to dig that deep." I leaned against the counter. I didn't have time to be average. He looked up. "Then help me be better than that." It would have been easy to say no, to remind him of all the nights I stayed up alone, building something from nothing while he flew through on a runway of support. But something in his tone stopped me. Not pride, not guilt. Maybe, just maybe, it was regret. I walked over, sat across from him, and opened a new document. "I'll help," I said, "but don't tell Mom and Dad." He blinked. "Why not?" "Because I don't need to be their convenient surprise, the one they trot out to prove they were fair all along." He nodded slowly. "Deal." We worked in shifts. Mornings bled into afternoons. Nights turned into all-nighters. I rewrote his structure, coached him through logical flow, built charts from scratch when his research fell short. I didn't do the work for him, but I showed him how to finish. He turned it in on a Monday. Passed? Barely. But he passed. I didn't go to the presentation. I didn't ask what his grade was. I just went back to my own projects. That Thursday, my phone rang. "Mom." "Caleb said you helped him," she chirped. "We're so proud of how you both turned out." I stared at the screen for a moment, then hit end call. No reply. No voicemail. Later that night, I opened the folder on my laptop labeled Caleb Thesis. I selected all the files, notes, edits, backups, and deleted them. I didn't want the proof. I didn't need the reminder that I once again held up someone who'd never learned how to swim because everyone assumed he'd float. What I needed was silence, not theirs. Mine. The subject line read, "Congratulations, Entrepreneurial Spirit Award recipient. Formal ceremony, 3 p.m., business casual. Guest limit, 2. I didn't forward it to anyone. That Friday, I pulled on a clean shirt, the one I usually saved for class presentations or interviews, and walked across campus with a folder under my arm and no expectations in my chest. The auditorium was half full, enough people to avoid awkward silence, not enough to feel like a crowd. Folding chairs had been arranged in even rows. A podium stood slightly off-center on the stage, and a banner behind it read, "Celebrating Initiative, Impact, and Integrity." My name was on the program, misspelled, of course. N. Bishop. Classic. I found my seat in the third row from the back, tucked between a junior chemistry major and a business student whose cologne could have cleared a hallway. No family section, no camera crew, no parents taking blurry iPhone videos, just polite clapping and shifting shoes. Dr. Rowe found me before the ceremony started. "You bootstrapped from nothing," she said with a quiet smile. "You're what we teach when we talk about grit." I half laughed. "I used to think grit meant being tough. Now I think it means being ignored and going anyway." She squeezed my shoulder. "Exactly." When they called my name, I almost didn't recognize it. "Nathan Bishop," the announcer said, mispronouncing it just enough to make the claps come half a second late. I stood, walked to the front, and accepted the plaque. It was wooden. Heavy. The kind of thing someone would hang on an office wall, somewhere future clients might notice. I shook hands with a few faculty, posed for a picture I knew no one in my family would ever ask to see, and took my seat. But as I sat there, applause still echoing faintly in the rafters, I felt something unfamiliar. Warmth. Not pride, exactly, not validation, but a settling. Like the sound had found its way into a part of me that had gone quiet long ago. It didn't fill the hollow left by my parents' silence, but it didn't need to. It fit a new shape. One I'd carved myself. After the ceremony, as people milled around balancing cookies on napkins and sipping lukewarm punch, a tall man in a navy blazer approached. "Mr. Bishop?" he asked. "Leonard Brandt. I help run the state's collegiate pitch competition." "Hi," I said, shaking his hand. "I read your profile. Your digital platform, it's not just viable, it's relevant, especially for rural small businesses." He handed me a card. "We'd love to see you apply. You've got something real." I thanked him, slid the card into my folder, and nodded politely as he drifted off. On my walk back to the apartment, I passed a group of students in graduation robes, taking photos by the campus fountain. One held up a cardboard sign that read, "Thanks, Mom and Dad." I didn't stop. When I got home, I placed the plaque on my desk. Next to it, I pulled out a note card and wrote in thick black ink. They paid for his tuition. But I earned this room full of hands clapping for me. As I set the card down, My phone buzzed. Caleb. Mom saw the school article about you. I think she doesn't know what to say. I didn't answer. Not out of spite, but because, for once, silence felt like something I owned. The envelope didn't have a return address, no handwriting on the front, just my name, typed, and tucked in our apartment mailbox between grocery flyers and a dentist appointment reminder Zeke kept ignoring. Inside, one cream-colored card, thick stock. Sunday dinner, just the four of us, 6 p.m. Signed in my mother's cursive. First invitation in years. I almost didn't go, but curiosity, habit, and maybe a trace of the old boy who used to wait for a chair at the grown-up table nudged me toward saying yes. The dining room hadn't changed much. Still the same dark wood table polished within an inch of its life. White linen napkins folded in triangles. 2 candlesticks burning low at the center. The good plates, the ones that only came out on holidays and for people they wanted to impress. There were place cards at each setting. Mine read, Nathan Bishop. I didn't mention it. Mom greeted me with a slightly too long hug. Dad clapped my shoulder like he wasn't sure if I was an employee or a son. Caleb was already seated, tapping something on his phone. He looked up, gave a nod that said, "Hang in there." I nodded back. We sat. "So," Dad began after a few bites, "I hear you're running some tech thing." I set my fork down gently. "It's called Mid-State Digital, and it's more than a thing." Mom smiled. "Caleb says it's growing fast. That's impressive." "It is," I said, keeping my tone even. They asked a few surface questions. I gave a few surface answers. I knew what this was. A cautious toe dip back into my life now that there was something shiny to point to. But the real tell came when Uncle Ross stopped by to drop off a dish Mom had lent him. He stepped inside, nodded at the candles, and glanced at me. "Your kid's doing better than most at 30, he said to Dad, chuckling. Dad shifted in his seat. "Well, we always knew he had potential." Mom smiled like she'd helped it grow in the backyard with the tomatoes. Caleb said nothing. Just watched. I took a sip of water. Chewed my bite slowly. Let the moment pass without responding. They were here because I was something now. But when I was nothing, just drive, ambition, and an acceptance letter, they were absent. That absence doesn't get fixed with candles and misspelled name cards. As soon as dessert hit the table, I pushed my chair back. "Thanks for dinner," I said. "I've got client calls in the morning." Mom blinked. "Already?" Dad reached for his coffee. "Big week ahead?" "Always is," I said. I stood, grabbed my coat, and left the name card right there on the plate. Quiet proof they still didn't really see me, even now. Back home, Zeke was passed out on the couch, a half-eaten burrito on his chest. My phone buzzed. Voicemail from Grandma Agnes. "Come by tomorrow, Nathan," her voice said, soft but certain. "There's something I've been keeping for you." The stage smelled like dry carpet and old nerves. I adjusted my collar, second-hand blazer, one button missing from the inside flap, and stepped forward. 5 judges sat behind a long table, each with a clipboard, a pen, and the kind of expression that could either mean "impress me" or "I've heard this 100 times today." I was the last finalist at the Iowa State Business Pitch Finals, a $15,000 prize on the line, along with bragging rights and the kind of investor attention that could change everything. The others had logos, teams, slide decks filled with animated transitions. I had a clean deck, 2 days' worth of rehearsed bullet points, and a folder in my brain filled with nights hunched over code, invoices, and a laptop held together with duct tape. I took a breath. "My family paid for my brother's college," I said. "I built this business to pay for mine." One of the judges looked up. Another nodded slightly. "That," said a woman in a navy blazer, "is the strongest opening line we've heard all day." So I kept going. I told them about Mid-State Digital, about the bakery, the sandwich shop, the rural businesses overlooked by agencies with glossy branding and retainer fees. I told them how I used coffee breaks and borrowed Wi-Fi to build websites for places where word of mouth used to be enough, but no longer is. I told them what grit looks like when it's not inspirational, but necessary. What it means to build credibility without capital. When I finished, the room was quiet for half a beat. Then came the applause. No wild cheering, no standing ovation, but honest, deliberate clapping. That kind of sound sinks in differently. Backstage, I sipped a bottle of lukewarm water and waited for the results. Other finalists paced, rechecked their phones, muttered last-minute mantras. I just sat. There was nothing left to fix. No better way to have said it. I had already done what I came to do. They announced my name second, drawing out the tension. Nathan Bishop, founder of Mid-State Digital, winner of the 2025 Iowa State Business Pitch Competition. I walked out, shook hands, posed for a few photos next to a massive check that looked more like a prop from a game show than something you could deposit. As I was stepping down, a tall man with silver hair and a dark green tie approached me. "Mr. Bishop," he said, "call me Monday." He handed me a card. Managing partner, Foxwell Equity Partners. I nodded, tucked the card into my pocket, and exhaled slowly. I didn't cry, I didn't shake, I just felt stable. Like everything I'd built wasn't just real, it was mine. Not borrowed, not inherited, not handed down. Earned, pixel by pixel. Later that day, a local business blog ran a headline. "Student entrepreneur wins big with DIY startup." The article had my name, spelled correctly this time, and a photo of me next to the oversized check, blazer wrinkled but smile intact. Back at the apartment, I tacked the check to my wall with thumbtacks and blue tape. Below it, I stuck a note card with 3 words in bold black marker. No sponsors, no shortcuts, just me. That evening my phone buzzed. Caleb. Mom saw the article. She asked if it was about you. I stared at the screen for a moment, not out of anger, just stillness. Even now, success felt like a message left on their doorstep, unread or unopened. But I didn't need them to read it. I already knew what it said. The subject line was clean and formal. "You've been selected as the student speaker for Westbridge Business School, class of 2025. I stared at it for a long time. Not because I didn't believe it, but because it felt like one of those moments that would live in the folds of memory, long after most emails get deleted. The ceremony was 3 weeks away. I'd be standing on a stage in front of the entire graduating class and their families, delivering a 3-minute address that was supposed to represent not just the journey of students, but the values of the institution itself. I closed the laptop gently. Let the moment breathe. Later that day, I stopped by Dr. Rowe's office. She smiled before I even opened my mouth. "You're not just the best performer," she said. "You represent what we want this school to stand for." I nodded, not quite trusting my voice yet. "Just write what you know," she added, "and speak like you've already earned the mic." Zeke's advice was simpler. "Wear real shoes," he said. "Make 'em hear you walk." So I wrote. I wrote in between coffee refills and client meetings. I wrote in the quiet hours of the morning, when the apartment was still and the glow of my desk lamp made everything else feel far away. I didn't write it for applause. I didn't write it for my family. I wrote it for the version of me who opened that beige envelope 4 years ago and sat alone while everyone else toasted my brother. The first draft came faster than I expected. And when I reached the final line, I didn't change a word. They paid for someone else. I built myself anyway. I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes. For the first time, thinking about the past didn't make me feel small. It made me feel sharpened, like all those silent nights and sideways glances had been sanding me down into something solid. The next day, I submitted the speech. No edits, no suggestions, just approved. That weekend, I pulled out the graduation stole Grandma Agnes had mailed me, cream-colored fabric, hand-stitched. At the bottom, in soft gray thread, was one line. Value is not granted, it's proven. I held it for a while before folding it carefully and placing it inside the garment bag with my gown. 3 days later, an RSVP confirmation landed in my inbox. Frank and Margaret Bishop, 2 seats reserved. I stared at it longer than I needed to. Not because I was unsure how to feel, but because I already knew. They were coming. Not because they believed in the journey, but because they'd heard about the destination. I stood in line with my cap in hand, fingers curled tight around the tassel, trying to keep the fabric from creasing. Caleb was 2 rows ahead, grinning as always, chatting with the student next to him like it was just another school event. I'd been scheduled to speak immediately after the diplomas were handed out. 3 minutes, 1 microphone, thousands of eyes. The university gym had never looked this polished. Banners of deep navy and silver hung from the rafters. Folding chairs lined the floor in perfect rows. Parents in pressed clothes filled the bleachers, cameras at the ready, clapping politely for names they didn't recognize. In the front row, I saw them. My parents, Frank and Margaret Bishop. Polished, proud, unprepared. Dad wore his courtroom blue suit. Mom had on a hat she only brought out for Easter and weddings. They leaned toward each other during each name announcement, applauding when Caleb's came across the speaker. Then it was my turn. President Harlow stepped up to the podium. This year's student speaker embodies the entrepreneurial spirit, the determination, and the quiet strength we hope every graduate carries forward. Please welcome Nathan Bishop. There was a moment before the applause, a flicker of pause. Then hands came together, some louder than others. I stood and walked slowly to the stage, not rushing, not performing, just moving, 1 foot in front of the other. The lights were hot. My stole itched slightly at the neck. The mic was taller than I expected. I cleared my throat. My family paid for my brother's college, I began, my voice steady. I paid my own way, with hours, grit, and coffee grounds. A few quiet laughs, a few sharp exhales, but mostly silence, the good kind, the kind that listens. I built Midstate Digital from a kitchen table that wobbled, between shifts at a cafe and late nights staring at code I barely understood. I learned business by living it, not by being told it belonged to me, but by proving I could carry it. I glanced out into the crowd. My mom's hands clutched her purse tighter. My dad leaned back in his seat, lips pressed together in a line so flat it could cut. I didn't linger. I didn't aim. I stand here not because I was expected to succeed, I continued, but because I decided to anyway. Applause came before I even stepped down. I didn't smile. I didn't scan for approval. I just nodded and returned to my seat. For the first time, my story had been told. Clearly, publicly, undeniably, and I hadn't needed their permission to tell it. After the ceremony, the gymnasium erupted into hugs and photos. Classmates slapped me on the back. Faculty shook my hand. Dr. Rowe teared up and whispered, exactly what needed to be said. Across the room, my parents stood awkwardly by the exit. They looked smaller somehow. Not older, just diminished. They didn't approach. Caleb did. He found me just as I was putting my cap away in my bag. They don't know what to say, he said. But I do. I waited. That was the bravest thing I've ever seen, he said. And for once, there wasn't a trace of performance in his voice. No speech for me, just presence. And maybe that was enough. A few minutes later, a school photographer snapped a candid near the mid-state digital banner the business department had printed for the event. In the shot, I'm standing tall, holding the plaque from the pitch competition. And in the blurred background, barely visible, my parents are walking out. Not the focus anymore. Not the story. Not the ones who handed me success, but the ones who watched me carry it anyway. The second envelope came without postage. Caleb dropped it off himself, handing it over without making eye contact. "Just come," he said. "No pressure." Inside, a folded card with clean lines and a slight perfume of formality. "Family dinner, Sunday at 6, just us. Mom." No signature flourish, no hint of apology, just a simple ask. I didn't answer right away. But I went. The dining room had been staged like a catalog shoot. Crisp white tablecloth, candles that flickered but didn't drip, folded napkins shaped like fans. The good silver. Polished wine glasses, even though none of us really drank. There were 4 place settings. At mine, a card. Nathan Bishop. Spelled correctly this time. Progress or optics? Mom wore a sweater she usually saved for Thanksgiving. Dad had ironed his shirt. Caleb stood near the window, his hands in his pockets like he wasn't sure if he was a guest or a co-host. We sat down. The food was well made. Roast chicken, roasted carrots, bread warm from the oven. But it tasted like formality. Every bite felt measured. Mom reached for a bread roll and said, too brightly, "I wish we'd done this more." Dad nodded. "We're proud of what you've built, really." I set my fork down gently. "I didn't build it so you'd be proud," I said. "I built it so I could stand without needing that." The air shifted, just slightly. A fork clinked against a plate. They didn't respond. Halfway through dinner, Uncle Ross stopped by to return a dish. He stepped into the room, glanced around, and nodded toward me. "To Nathan," he said, raising an invisible glass, "who made it without shortcuts." The silence that followed was sharp and brief. Mom forced a smile. Dad cleared his throat. Caleb clapped once, then stopped. No one offered a toast. The rest of the meal passed in cautious conversation. Safe topics, neutral questions, things that couldn't tip over. It felt less like reconciliation and more like PR. I didn't want revenge. I wanted clarity, and now I had it. I didn't owe them anything. Not gratitude, not updates, not even resentment. When dessert came out, apple pie, slightly too sweet, I pushed back my chair. "Thanks for dinner," I said. "I've got an early morning." Mom blinked. "Already?" Dad looked like he wanted to say something but didn't. "No fight," I added. "It was a good meal, that's all." I grabbed my coat, gave Caleb a small nod, and walked to the porch. The spring air was cooler than I expected. Caleb followed. We stood in silence under the porch light, the house glowing soft behind us. "He kept every article about you," he said quietly. I didn't ask who he was. I didn't need to. Back at the apartment, I opened my car door, and something fluttered from the visor. An old high school photo. Me in a too big debate club shirt, standing stiffly next to a poster board project. On the back, written in fading ink, "Found this in the garage. Thought you'd want it back." I stared at it for a long time. No note, no name, just a gesture. Small. Late. But maybe, just maybe, real. "There's something I want to give you before the world moves too fast." Grandma Agnes didn't look up when she said it. She sat in her favorite rocking chair, swaying gently, her fingers folded neatly in her lap. The porch creaked beneath us as cicadas hummed in the trees beyond the lake. It was mid-June, and the sun was doing that thing it does best, turning everything it touched to honey. The cabin had always been a kind of in-between space for me. Not exactly home, but not the world either. Just stillness. Just her. She reached under her chair and pulled out a small wooden box, hand-carved, edges worn smooth with age and intent. "I kept this," she said, "for the grandchild who reminded me most of myself." I didn't know what to say. I took the box with both hands, as if it could shatter. Inside, nestled against velvet older than I was, sat a simple silver bracelet. No gems, no clasp, just a smooth band, polished by time. Engraved on the inside, "Self-worth is inherited from within." I didn't realize I was crying until she reached out and gently brushed my cheek with her thumb. "I thought about giving it to you years ago," she said, "but I wanted you to find your own way first." I tried to speak, but nothing made it to my mouth. So I held the bracelet, held it like it was a lifeline through time, and let the tears come. Not when they ignored me, not even at graduation, but here, with her. This wasn't approval, it was something deeper, not earned through achievement, but offered through knowing. "I didn't come from nothing," I whispered. "I came from you." She smiled. "That's right." We sat in silence after that. The kind that didn't need filling. The kind you only get with someone who's always seen you, even when others didn't look. I slipped the bracelet onto my wrist. It fit as though it had been waiting for me all along. Later, as we watched the water darken and soften into dusk, I told her what I'd decided. "I want to start a scholarship," I said, "but not in my name, in yours, for students like me, who no one plans for, but who make it anyway." Her eyes glistened. "Don't make me cry, Nathan. I've already done my makeup." We both laughed, but even in the laughter, something settled inside me, a sense of rootedness, of continuation. She didn't ask why I chose her name. She didn't have to. On the drive home, the windows were down, and the air was thick with pine and pollen. The bracelet caught the light on my wrist, silver flashing against the steering wheel. For once, I didn't care who saw it. As I turned onto campus roads, my phone buzzed in the cup holder. Zeke. "Ready to plan this fundraiser? Or do I have to wear a suit again?" I smiled, tapping my fingers against the bracelet. "Let's plan," I said aloud to no one. "Let's make something last." The business school auditorium was full before we even unlocked the side doors. We had to add folding chairs, squeeze in the last row of volunteers, and clear space near the windows just to fit the walk-ins. For a moment, standing by the podium in a suit that still didn't feel quite mine, I almost didn't recognize where I was. There were banners hung above the entryway. The Agnes Bishop Resilience Fund. And beneath them, long tables lined with silent auction items, gift baskets, artwork from student designers, free consulting sessions I'd promised on a whiteboard during setup, and was already mildly regretting. But what stood out the most wasn't the decor. It was the people, students in suits too big for them, faculty members with coffee-stained folders, business owners from the town where I first printed flyers and prayed someone would call. And every single seat filled. Zeke adjusted the mic before stepping back. He'd shaved for the occasion and wore a borrowed blazer that still had the tag on the sleeve. "You good?" he whispered. "As I'll ever be," I said. Then I stepped up. "Thank you all for coming," I began. "Tonight isn't about one name or one company. It's about a truth a lot of us know but don't always say out loud. Not everyone gets funded. Not everyone gets picked. But everyone deserves to be seen. A beat of quiet. Then heads nodded. Eyes lifted. I told them about building Mid-State Digital at 2 a.m., about coffee shops and rejection emails and clients who paid in pie because that's what they had. I told them about Grandma Agnes, about her bracelet, and what it meant to be told, just once, that your worth wasn't up for debate. Then Dean Brandt took the stage. "You've turned a private struggle into a public lighthouse," he said, "and tonight, we get to turn that light outward." The moment came. A name was called. Avery Cruz. She stood slowly from the front row. Full-time student, part-time caregiver to her younger siblings, holding a 3.9 GPA while working nights at a 24-hour grocery store. As she stepped up to receive the first-ever Agnes Bishop Resilience Scholarship, she held her breath the way I used to, like even kindness had to be earned. We made eye contact as I handed her the certificate. She blinked back tears. I felt something shift, not just for her, but in me. I saw myself in her. But more importantly, I saw what happens when someone is given a chance before they have to prove they're worth one. By the end of the night, we'd raised 3 times our goal. Mid-State Digital picked up 2 new regional clients. The scholarship was funded for 5 years. It should have felt overwhelming. Instead, it felt right. Like everything had landed where it was meant to. People lingered. There were hugs, photos, promises of coffee sometime next week. The applause had been loud, but the conversations afterward were even louder. Real. Toward the back of the room, Caleb waited, hands tucked into his pockets. When the crowd thinned, he approached. "From Dad," he said quietly, handing me a sealed envelope. "He didn't want to interrupt tonight." I held it, cool and weightless in my palm. "I haven't opened it," Caleb added. "I figured that part should be yours." I nodded, said nothing. Long after everyone else left, I stood at the front of the room again. The chairs were half stacked, the last banner sagging slightly in the corner. I looked around the space. The same one where I once sat unnoticed at the back of an awards event, my name misspelled on a program. Now, the spotlight had shifted. Not because I'd claimed it, but because I'd built something too solid to ignore. I slipped the envelope into my coat pocket, unopened. Not out of fear, but because, for once, I didn't need it to know who I was. The envelope sat on my desk for 3 days. It moved from the edge to the center, then under a stack of receipts, then back on top again. I didn't avoid it. Not really. I just let it wait. On a quiet morning, with sunlight stretching across the windowsill and coffee warming my palms, I opened it. The paper inside was thick, the ink faintly smudged. My father's handwriting hadn't changed. Blocky, deliberate, like he still didn't quite trust cursive. "You were never invisible. I just wasn't looking. I'm sorry. Dad." That was it. No explanation. No paragraph about pressures or mistakes. Just a sentence. Short, blunt, honest. I didn't cry. I didn't feel vindicated. But I felt something else. A kind of quiet settling. Forgiveness isn't a door swinging open. It's a weight you decide to stop dragging. Later that week, we had lunch together. My parents, Caleb, and me. No silverware polished, no tablecloths, just burgers, iced tea, and a sun-warmed deck. Mom offered potato salad like it was currency. Dad stayed quiet, eyes squinting against the light. At one point, Mom leaned over and said, "If you ever need help with that next project, let me know. I'm no tech genius, but I can stuff envelopes." I smiled. "Thanks. But I've got a great team already." It wasn't cold. It was just true. Then Caleb, out of nowhere, stood up. His paper plate wobbled in his hand. "If I'd been the one left behind," he said, "I'm not sure I'd have turned out as well as you." The table went quiet. Even the birds paused. Just so you know, he added, then sat back down like nothing happened. I nodded. And for once, I didn't downplay the compliment. I let it land. That version of me, I said, deserved to be seen. I looked at each of them, one by one. And now he is. I left the house that day without looking back. No guilt, no hunger for validation, just enoughness. That was the word I carried home. The one that didn't need applause or an audience. Later, on campus, I spotted a freshman standing by a map kiosk, spinning in circles. He looked overwhelmed, clutching a campus folder and a class schedule like they might start making sense if he stared long enough. I walked over. Lost? I asked. He laughed nervously. Kind of. Econ building? Come on, I said. I'll show you. We walked in silence for a minute. Then he glanced sideways. You work here? I grinned. Sort of. Long story. That night back in my apartment, I took down the sticky note from 2 years ago, the one that said, "Build the confetti yourself." In its place, I hung the bracelet Grandma Agnes had given me, right beside my framed mid-state digital certificate. One whispered worth, one earned name. Together they told the full story. And for once, I didn't feel like I had to explain any of it. In the Midwest, we don't always say things out loud. We show up with pie. We nod at the end of phone calls. We leave envelopes on the kitchen table instead of starting hard conversations. I used to think that silence meant I wasn't seen, that if no one said the words, maybe I didn't matter enough to warrant them. But I've learned that sometimes silence isn't absence, it's space, a quiet waiting. And eventually, when the words do come, however late, however small, they can still land. I don't know if my father will ever say more than what was written in that note. I don't know if my mother will ever fully understand the weight of her quiet. But I've stopped needing that kind of understanding. What matters now is what I carry. The bracelet from my grandmother. The memory of applause I never had to share. The way Caleb looks at me when he forgets to compare us. What matters is that I built something lasting, not just in code and clients, but in meaning. I used to want a seat at their table. Now I build my own and pull up chairs for others who were also left standing. In the end, it's not about proving anyone wrong. It's about knowing, deep in your chest, that you were right to keep going. Sometimes, the validation we crave from others is simply a reflection of what we haven't yet given ourselves. Build your own value. Nurture it quietly. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting the hurt. It means choosing to stop carrying it. And remember, silence from others is never a reason to silence your own voice. If this story moved you in any way, if it reminded you of your own resilience, or of someone who deserves to be seen, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. We share family stories that speak quietly but deeply. Explore more. You might find the piece of yourself you didn't know you'd left behind.